Hi and welcome back to Run My Art, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to paint frozen winter berries in watercolor and with some assistance of other medium like gouache and soft pastel. And usually it's a very challenging task to paint winter themed objects or winter landscapes, especially with that frozen effect and ice. But with the use of right technique and medium, we can definitely nail a good winter themed painting, and I'll show you how. So I'll be using a reference photo from Pixabay, and I've left the link to the photo in the description. So the color palette is pretty basic with just 5 colors. And the painting is going to be of square orientation, and the measurement is 14 centimeter by 14 centimeter or 5.5 inches. And for the sketching purposes, I have marked the midpoint of the paper size just to draw a simple grid as a guidance for my winter berry sketch, whereby I want to sketch it on the middle part of the paper. You can skip this sketching process if you want to and head straight to the painting process. So it's just some basic sketches of circles or round shape of the winter berry that I'm going to paint, and I don't need very thorough details. After all, there's going to be some frost effect covering the berry shape, so don't worry too much about your sketch. I just want it to be coordinated towards the middle of the paper. So once done with my sketch, I'm just erasing all those grid marks that I drew earlier, as well as lightly erasing the outline of the sketch so that it doesn't look too obvious on the painting. By the way, I used a gum-free eraser as well as a stapler pencil which has got a fine size tip. And as for the masking tape, I have two types, but I'm going to go with the Hahnemuhl masking tape. The Scotch brand is quite good. It's just that the size is slightly smaller than the Hahnemuhl masking tape, whereby the bigger size tape holds the paper better onto the surface of the table. Besides, the Hahnemuhl tape is very compatible with watercolor paper since they produce watercolor papers vastly, and I've never had any negative experiences where it tore my paper or had some watercolor paints leaked into my paper. So it's always been a clean process for me when I use Hahnemuhl tape. So the first step to this painting is to pre-wet the entire paper with clean water. I prefer to use a sponge and quickly paint in the first color, which is cobalt blue. You don't need a very thick mixture, just a normal consistency, and while the paper is still wet, just paint over the cobalt blue, avoiding the frozen berry or the berry sketch. And over here I'm using a flat brush, but you can also use a round brush or mop brush to paint this first layer. Just control the brush move or position according to the spaces that you paint. For example, narrow spaces, just use the tip of the brush. So next I'm just lifting some pigment on the first layer of the painting by using a damp brush. So just use a damp brush. It shouldn't be wet, otherwise it will be creating some loops of water, so you don't want that kind of accidents to happen. So remove the excess water from your brush by using a paper towel. And I'm also lifting pigment around the berry sketch, because that's where we want to create the frozen impression or effect. And the pigment lifting process has to be done while the first layer of paint is still wet. So do not let your painting dry and attempt to remove the pigment. A quick cleanup of wet paint that's on the surface of the masking tape. I don't want them to smudge onto my painting. So to start painting the berries, I'm using a bright red and roughly just painting that in and not worrying too much onto the exact shape of the berry. As I said earlier, we're going to have the frozen impact or ice on the berries, so the actual shape could not be seen in the end product or end painting. And you don't have to pre-wet the surface of the paper for the winter berry painting, because I'm using a wet on dry method. So I'm just simply using the mixture of paint onto the dry surface, because I don't want too much of bleeding to take place, simply because we need to make the frost on the berries. And for this painting, I would advise you to use a round brush with a fine tip, because round brushes have got a less sharp tip as well. So choose the one which has got a fine tip so that you can control the corners of your painting. And for the second color of the berry, I'm using crimson, and with the use of rigger brush, I just dabbed in those crimson onto the wet bright red painting. And while I wait for the berry painting to dry, I am re-wetting the other parts of the painting with clean water and applying once again the cobalt blue that I used earlier, as I felt that the painting has dried a bit lighter. So to darken it, I am just repainting the cobalt blue. So for the first frost effect, I'm using Schminke white gouache to paint the tree branches or the berries branches using a rigger brush. You can use any type of rigger brush that suits your need, as long as it has got a fine tip. And you can see, as the surface of the painting was still wet, the gouache paint tends to bleed in, not too much but lightly bleed into the first layer of paint, creating that soft frost look. And while the red berries painting is semi-wet, I'm just quickly dabbing in the same white gouache using the same rigger brush to create the frost effect on the berry. And a quick clean of some of the bleeding or mistake with a damp brush. A close view of that white gouache frost effect on the red berries, and we leave that to dry. And this is how it looks once it's dry, and you can see the bleached effect of the gouache on the berries. So I'm trying to darken some parts of the berries so that it looks more natural, imitating some dark areas as in shadow. And you can do this by mixing up the crimson with your dark brown or sepia, so that you can get a darker red or deep red or even burgundy. Just roughly coloring that in or painting that in on the areas where I foresee would have some shadow. And as I said earlier, to paint finer details, it will be easier to use a round brush with a fine tip. You can use some miniature brushes as well to achieve this kind of effect. However, they are not going to hold much water, especially if you're doing wet in wet painting. And since we are not going to focus too much on the fine details, I prefer to use a round brush. Done with the berries, now I'm going to repaint the tree branch by using a very wet consistency of white gouache. So just quickly painting that in. And take note, I'm painting this wet on dry paper, so I have not re-wet the paper. And right now I'm using a script brush to paint over the white gouache using Sophia. And I'm also painting the stem of the berries with white gouache, and you can notice as I paint the white gouache, the Sophia which was painted on the main tree branch has profusely bleed into the white gouache of the berry stem. And using the same Sophia paint, I'm quickly just painting more of the stems of the berry. You can see as the Sophia and the gouache mixes onto each other, it creates that frost effect. Now extending the same painting step towards the other parts or other branches seen in the background. So just reapply wet mix of the white gouache onto the other branches, and we're going to apply the Sophia paint using the script brush onto that wet gouache. And as you apply, you will definitely notice Sophia mixing with the white gouache, creating that frost effect. A close look on that mixing effect between these two colors, and don't have to be so worried about the shape of your tree branch. After all, we're going to show frost and snow covering these branches and stem. Now to create the frost effect on the berries itself, I'm going to re-wet the outlines or the area around the berries. So pre-wet it with some clean water. You can use any brush. I'm using a flat brush since it doesn't hold too much of water. If the berries tend to bleed a bit due to the water effect, do not worry. Just clean up the bleeding with some paper towel. You can even leave it just like that, because at the end of the day, that bleeding effect is going to create more natural frost look. And after that, I'm quickly using the same script brush to apply the white gouache onto the berries as well as the outline of the berries. Notice how quickly the white gouache bleeds onto the wet areas, creating that tiny needle-like look which imitates the frost effect. And I'm applying more gouache towards the area which has bled with the red pigment of the berry. And with that tip, I'm just creating some needle-like shapes just to create an impression of sharp frost or ice on the berries. Now back to the branches, re-wetting the outline of the tree branch with some water. And while the surface is wet, I'm quickly applying the same white gouache, but this time using the script brush, so that it creates a very fine line or needle-like shapes that I mentioned earlier. Notice how quickly the white gouache blooms onto the wet surface. Repeating the same technique, onto the other branches as well. So continue painting the other three branches using the same technique, and you can stop when you are satisfied with the frost effect that you have created. Reapplying the white gouache onto areas that have faded. You can skip this if you don't want to, but I just felt that I needed more frost on the background tree branches. More frost effect on the main stem of the berries. So if any of you find this method very helpful, do let me know in the comments below. Now applying more gouache onto the dry berry painting to define more shapes and give it more character of the frost. So I'm almost done using white gouache to create this frost effect. I'm going to be showing another medium, which is soft pastel. So if you're happy with this gouache effect look, you can totally skip this step, but I'd like to share an additional medium that can be used to enhance your watercolor painting. And for this frost effect, I am using white soft pastel from the brand Zenelia. Just roughly applying the soft pastel onto the tree branches. Once applied, just lightly blend it in. You can also leave it as it is, but I thought of blending in on some areas of the branches. So if you've used soft pastel before, you know what to do. Now I'm applying the soft pastel onto the berry painting, and you can see as soon as I start applying the pastel, it quickly creates that frost look on the berry, which is a very quick fix if you ask me. In fact, I personally feel it has even enhanced the color of the red berries. What do you think? and some snowfall or snowflake effect using the same white pastel, and a quick dab as a way of blending that snowflake in. And to finish up the entire painting, I'm going to use white gouache on my rigger brush with a very wet consistency and tap it to create splatters, random splatters, as well as with a little bit mix of cobalt blue just to add some extra color or vibrancy. After all, what's a watercolor painting without some splatters, right? And as I peel off the masking tape, you can notice it easily peels off, and it also maintains a very clean white border, which explains why this masking tape is my favorite. So, do you like the look of this frost effect that I've created using the techniques that I've shared earlier? Then do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. So just sharing in a glance, the pastel brand that I have used, and I'm still using for my other pastel paintings, as well as the white gouache from Schminke Horadam. And these two brands are very well known and originated from Europe, which is France and Germany. So if you are a fan of soft pastel, I also have a tutorial on how to paint this Christmas tree in soft pastel, which I posted last week. So if you have missed that video, you can check out the links that I've left in the description as well as in the video itself. So if you like my video, do share it with your family and friends, and if you are not a subscriber yet, do subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon for my latest video updates. See you again. Bye.